The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. We would like to now hand over to counsels for Mr. Ieng Sari to proceed with their questions to the witness. You may now proceed, counsel.
Mr. President, could I have 2 minutes of your time?
The President, no, you are not allowed. Counsel for Ieng Sari, you may now proceed. The President, counsel for Nuon Chea, if you would like to be heard, you would be asked to write your application in writing and have it submitted to the chamber. The President continues, you are not allowed to have the floor now because the time allocated to you had already been used up, and that if you would wish to address the chamber, you are asked to make it in writing. Counsel Ang Adam, good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors, and good afternoon, Mr. Witness. Now we shall continue our questions. Before we broke, I referred to your statement in which you indicated you referred to the upper level or upper echelon decisions and the arrests of diplomats. My next question will be, what kind of information that you obtained genuinely to believe that the senior leaders attended meetings? What kind of information you obtained to prove this? Response. I haven't received any actual information on this. Question. Have you received any actual information concerning the communication between the senior leaders who to prove that you know people who attended such meetings? Response. My response would be the same. I don't know. I don't know. In the framework of the leadership, I have no idea who attended which meeting. Response. In your statement, you say that you learned about this information based on your job performance. So in practice, could you tell the court in the course of your work whether you're familiar with any items of the agenda of the meetings? The President, witness, you are not instructed to respond to this question because you indicated clearly that you had no knowledge of the meetings. How could you understand the items of the agenda of that meeting? Counsel Angadam. Thank you, Mr. President. Question. Did you happen to obtain the direct information concerning any of the meetings where the senior leaders could have made decisions? Response. The decisions and the meetings and the procedures in these meetings have already been well testified in my statement previously, and I don't know anything about this because it is the work of the senior leaders. Counsel Angadam, I have no further questions to put to you, Mr. Witness. I thank you, the Chamber, for this, and I would like to wish you all the best. Thank you, Mr. President. The President, thank you. We would like now to proceed to counsels for Mr. Kil Sampon to put questions. Council mic is activated, but the interpreter cannot hear anything. The President, Council, you may start your remark again because previously your statement was not heard. Council Kung Samon. Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, Mr. Nikon. I am Kung Samon, representing Kil Sampon. I have a few questions to put to you concerning your testimonies before this chamber. First of all, may I know whether you have used any other names other than Nikon? Response. I have 3 names: Kon, Kan, Sat. Question. Could you spell Kin and Sat in Khmer to us, please? Response. Yes, I can. Kon is spelled K-A-N. Kan, K-I-N. Sat, SATH. Counsel, thank you. Have you used the other names you just indicated before the chamber more frequently? Response. The name I used more frequently were Con and Kun. Question. What about Sad? Do people know you by the name of Sad? Response. Yes, they do, but only a few people know this. Question. Have you ever signed on any official documents with other names other than Con and Kin? Response. No, I haven't used any other names on the paper other than Con. Question. You reiterated time again during the testimonies before this chamber concerning the principle of secrecy during the Democratic Cambodia's regime. Can you confirm what kind of education you were given in order for you to maintain this secrecy? Response. Could you repeat the question? Question. Concerning this secrecy, we would like you to tell us what kind of study session or education you received to keep such secret. Response. We received instructions and education on how to maintain secrecy, and we would be instructed to keep the secret. The secret here refers to internal affairs. Any issues concerning the work, internal work, and that each level of responsibility had to understand any certain level of secrecy. So people at different levels would be expected to understand and to keep the secrecy at each respective level. And we have had several slogans on this, and I do not recollect them well. But I remember the one slogan very well, which is, we only mind our own business. So we know our work, and we are not supposed to know somebody's work. And we should not be envisaged to want to know others' business. That's the part of the slogan used at that time, and the slogan that I remember very well. And this is part of the instruction we were given. Having received such instructions, I imparted them to the people who were concerned during the course of my work according to this hierarchy. Counsel, thank you. In case someone failed to maintain the secrecy, what would happen to them? Response. There was a procedure in which people would be criticized in the self-criticism sessions. People had to criticize themselves to see whether they could maintain the secrecy very well or not. This is part of the qualification of each individual. And in the session, people would be criticized and and advised not to commit the same wrongdoing if they know if they had done so. Question. What about yourself? During the Democratic Cambodia regime, to what extent had you maintained the secrecy? Response. I just followed instructions. I was self-conscious and I understood what would be the right things, what would be the wrong things, and I had to follow these principles. Counsel, thank you. In the course of your work, had you ever abused the principle of confidentiality or secrecy in the regime? Response. As I remember, I have never abused these principles. Counsel, thank you. I have another question concerning the document presented to you already during the course of the testimony, document D91/21 on page number 3. With Mr. President's leave, I would like the document to be put up on the screen, please. The President, you may proceed. This document is under ERN in Khmer 00204129. French ERNs 00529340. In English 0022 3626. Counsel, Mr. Witness, do you see the document now? Could you read Khmer text? If you can read the text from the screen, please do so for us. If not, I may present the hard copy of the document to you so that you can read from them. Response. I can indeed read from the screen. I would like to refer to my apologies, Mr. President. My computer was not connected to the system to be able for me to read the portion of the text. I now obtained the text, and I would like to refer to the portion on the bottom of the page. The final question, the final paragraph, indeed. You can see the fourth line, which start with NK. I would like to read from the text as follows. You said, I know Ieng Sari clearly. As for Khieu Samphan, Ieng Thirit and Nuon Chia, I know them too, because they were the upper echelon. Could you explain to us what are you referring to when you said upper echelon? Response. I may wish to explain this as follows. Upper echelon is the spoken language. In the spoken language, we at one point say upper echelon, at another on another occasion we say that upper level. So they refer to the leaders, senior leaders. Counsel, thank you. What was the relationship between the upper echelon to your work, your position? Or was there no communication at all? Response. The upper echelon or level that I stated in my interview is referring to the general upper level of leadership. There are other upper level people as well in each section, but it depends on the languages they use. But for me, I refer upper echelon to the supreme upper echelon. Council. So, is it fair to say that this upper echelon had nothing to do with the supervision of your unit? Is that correct? Response. I may wish to emphasize, perhaps I didn't make myself clear. Upper echelon here refer to those individuals whose name appeared in my statement. Council, thank you. Do you know Mr. Kyo Sompon personally during the Democratic Cambodia regime, and rather, did you know him personally during the regime and also at a later date? Response. I never known him personally. I know him in the capacity as he was the leader who attended a ceremony or an event where I also went to, but we have had not been very close. Question. Had you ever received any instructions or orders from Mr. Kyo Sompon during the Democratic Cambodia? Response. No, I hadn't received any direct orders from him because our tasks were different. I worked in the framework of the ministry, so I would receive orders or instructions from the ministry only.
Council, I would like to ask you for a clarification on the record of interview of the Office of Co-Investigating Judges, document D91/22. On page 2, EON in Khmer 00204132.
I
would like to seek leave from the chamber to have this document put up on the screen. The President. Assistant, please make sure that the document is put up on the screen. Council, Mr. Nikon, can you look at the screen, the line which we have underlined?
Butចំណុចត្រង់នេះលោកមេធាវីរបស់លោកអៀងសេរី
On this particular portion of the interview, counsel for Ieng Sari asked relevant question on this portion. So I would like to ask you for clarification on this part. Can you read out to the court this portion of the interview? Response. I would like to read it out, and if I did not read out exactly the portion you expected, I apologize. The removal of the diplomats was decided by the upper echelon, and upper echelon consists of Pol Pot alias Pol, Nuon Chia alias Nuon, Ieng Sari alias Wan, and Khieu Samphan. I never met those leaders.
បាទសូមអរគុណ
Counsel, thank you. Actually, I also wanted you to read a sentence preceding that portion, which includes the arrest of those diplomats. But you did not have to read it out again because I have already mentioned it.
ត្រង់ចំណុចនេះតកតង
On this particular point, it concerns the decision of the upper echelon. According to your previous testimony, you said you did not take part in the decision, and neither did you receive any reports or instruction by the upper echelon. This was according to your statement earlier to the question put by counsel for Ieng Sari. So my question is, what was the basis for your answer that the decision was made by those who were in the upper echelon? Response. The basis upon which you insist that I present is that it was based on the common practice. First, concerning the arrest of diplomats of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, allow me to put it into picture. When I first arrived in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the organizational structure was there already, and I was an individual who was transferred and attached to a department. Probably I was on a, suspension from work, and I was simply placed in that position because the structure already existed and operational. Secondly, when I arrived in MFA, I did not know those individuals, diplomats who were arrested, and it was only when the Office of Co-Investigating Judges asked me, then I said I did not know about the decision, and simply because I did not know, I could not simply say I know it. And I testified earlier on this morning that the decision at the political level was considered internal matters of the party, and it was the decision of the leader. And I did not even know the date of the meetings. And if you dwell on the subject matter or even the items of the agendas of the meeting, I did not even know. And if you ask me for the basis for my answer, I simply said that I could provide that answer based on the common practice. Council. So to sum up what you have just said, based on your general understanding of the circumstance at that time, the decision must have been made by those who were in the upper echelon. Is that correct to say so? Response. Yes, that was according to it was according to my knowledge. It was so. Council. You described a few members of those who were in the leadership. Did you know that these leaders work together, or you did not know their working arrangement at all? Response. No, I didn't know. Council, thank you. So I take it that your statement to the Office of Co-Investigating Judges in the document I just mentioned was your mere speculation. Is that correct? The President. The International Co-Prosecutor, you may proceed.
Monsieur le Président, nous nous trouvons.
Mr. President, we seem to be facing the same scenario as earlier on. The National Council for Yingzari had asked the same question earlier and received the same answer. I believe that Council has just asked a suggestive and leading question.
The President. Thank you. The objection by the prosecution is sustained. The witness need not to answer the last question posed by the defense counsel because it is leading. Counsel, thank you, Mr. President. That is all for me. The President. International Council for Kyusampon, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, good afternoon. Your Honors, all members of this courtroom, Mr. Witness, good afternoon. My name is Anta Gise. I am one of the international co-lawyers representing Mr. Kyusampon, and it is in that capacity that I will be putting this afternoon's final questions to you. Allow me to remind you that we are being simultaneously interpreted. If there's any difficulty in understanding my questions, please do not hesitate in asking me to clarify or to repeat. To begin, let us go back in time. What was the profession or trade of your parents?
Response. My parents' occupation was farmer. They did farming for the living.
And Mr. Witness, would you say that your parents owned their land, or were they modest farmers of modest means?
Response. My parents were the middle class peasants. We had 2 pairs of cattle, and we owned a few farmlands ourselves. But I cannot recall them all.
You stated that at the age of 15, you left to continue your studies in Phnom Penh. So did you live with your parents up until the age of 15? Is this what I am to understand?
Response. After I left my parents, I came to live with my brother, my other brother, by the name of Ni Chum. He was also a teacher back then.
Vous avez indiqué lors de votre...
You testified that you were a teacher in Siem Reap. Who did you teach? Where did you teach? How old were the children?
The President, witness need not answer the question because this question is not relevant.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, with all due respect, the question is relevant. In the case of this cross-examination, I'm not able to ask direct questions. I must establish a foundation in order to focus in on the topic that is of interest to me. Therefore, I ask leave from your chamber to ask that question.
The chamber has already ruled on that issue. You may move on. And please refrain from asking irrelevant question or repetitive question or question that elicit assumption or conclusion or subjective assumption of the witness.
Très bien, Monsieur le Président.
Very well, Mr. President. I shall move on to the next subject of my cross-examination. Now, during the time that you were part of the peasant class in Siem Reap, and before you officially joined the revolution in 1970, did you witness any bombardments in the region?
Response. Immediately after the coup d'etat, the bombardment did not occur in the countryside, but when the war broke out and it was widespread, then there was aerial bombardments. And of course, the bombardments were from somewhere around Kampung Thom province all the way to Siem Reap. And normally, the bombardment targeted bridges.
Et Monsieur Nikan,
And Mr. Nikan, in your work disseminating propaganda, and over the course of your discussions with groups and the masses, were the bombardments used as a reason to incite people to join the popular movements?
Response. It was my personal witness. The bombardments that killed people, destroy people's property. This ignited the masses to join the movement, the popular movement.
In your testimony, you stated that one of your duties in your propaganda work was to act as advisor on farming issues and to talk about unity within the country, to talk about self-sufficiency, and to talk about improving life conditions, living conditions. My first question to you is this. Based on your experience, how was this discourse welcomed by the people?
Could you please repeat your question? I didn't quite catch it.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Witness. I'll simplify my question. Now, in your testimony before this court, you indicated that you carried out propaganda work with the masses. And that over the course of your work spreading propaganda, you dealt with several issues, including agricultural techniques. You also said that you raised awareness among the people with respect to the country's unity, with respect to self-sufficiency. And you also spoke in general terms about the improvement of living conditions. So my first question for you is this. Based on your own experience, how were those teachings and how was this discourse received by the people that these teachings were destined to?
Response. First, I would like to highlight that I did not say about national unity. I did not say that in my testimony earlier, but I did say that we had to uphold the self-sufficiency. Secondly, the propaganda we spread to the people at that time was to encourage people to cultivate rice, to plant potatoes and other secondary vegetation, and that was to improve production. However, the yield was not sufficient because the place where we spread propaganda was that people had to cultivate rice and crops in order to feed themselves, and in addition to that they had to provide supply to support soldiers in the battlefields as well.
On several occasions, particularly in response to the questions put to you by the civil party lawyers, that harvests and yields were insufficient. Can you please tell this chamber why there were such poor harvests, particularly in the region that you were familiar with?
Response. The harvest yield the harvest yield was not actually calculated or sum up. So it was based on the actual harvest, but there was no specific figure attached to it. But what I saw at that time was that the harvest was not sufficient to feed the people at that place.
My question was a bit more specific. I wanted to know whether there was such poor harvest because of the low fertility of the land or for any other reasons.
Response. Poor harvest was resulted from, of course, the condition of land, because in certain part of the arable land were less fertile, and where other part of the arable land lacks of water supply. And in addition, people did not have agricultural techniques. For example, farmers did not have knowledge how to make their land fertile and how to administer fertilizer to the field. And in addition to that, there was a big disproportionate division of harvest On the one hand, they had to feed themselves. On the other hand, they had to supply to the soldiers. That's why it was the basis of my answer to the question earlier that I witnessed that the harvest was not sufficient to feed the people there.
In those circumstances, would it be correct to say that the situation was made all the worse because we were in a state of war?
Response. I can add that it was partly related to the state of war as well, because we had to have supply for those who went into war.
Mr. Witness, I will now move on to a different point. You stated that during the period of 1970 to 1975, you were in the Maquis. You also stated that you were led to travel frequently for security reasons. My question to you is this. How did these frequent traveling reinforce security?
Response. The term security I refer to here is rather broad. And I perhaps talked about it too briefly in a narrow sense. Security at that time was referring to the bombardments of the aerial bombardments, and also it related to the people who could pursue to be spies. So people had to be very careful and not to remain in one place for long, otherwise they would be bombed. And I think for that reason, security here is referring to how we move places to avoid being attacked or spied on.
Répondant.
Answering a question by the international co-prosecutor yesterday or perhaps earlier, you said you referred to the aerial bombardments, and the co-prosecutor said that in 1973 there were no further bombings by the US. So my question is, do you know if the London troops had their own air force?
Response. The opponents in the fightings were the London troops and the only two sides, the Lonol and the front troops. Lonol was backed by Americans, so there must have been bombers, there must be planes to support the Lonol people with bombs to be dropped, and I don't know the exact detail of this or in any particular unit they belong to.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Let's switch to another line of questioning. You have mentioned over the last 3 days the different positions that you held, first during the revolution and then subsequently within Democratic Cambodia. If I understood correctly, you started by being a teacher and then you were in charge of propaganda for several years, and you ended up working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Protocol Service. Is that a correct summary of the different positions you have held?
Response. I may wish to remind you that I finished a junior high school and I started working as a primary school teacher. I was not a lecturer or professor. And at the primary school, I taught pupils or young students. And I perhaps cannot respond to the second question of yours because it's long, but I have already made it clear concerning my positions I held during the time. I was a propagandist. I was much needed at that time, and normally as a teacher, he or she would be able to speak convincingly so that people could listen to him or her, and I had remained a propagandist all along. And later on, I did end up being a person attached to the protocol service.
Thank you, Mr. Nikan, for that information. Can it therefore be said that apart from those posts, you didn't hold any other positions within Democratic Cambodia?
Response. I was appointed in the propaganda and education section, and as I indicated, I was much needed in that section. They needed people who were capable of doing the propaganda service. And this doesn't mean that I had to do the propaganda service all across the country. I was confined to the section that I was much needed for.
Yes, I understood that, Mr. Witness. But my question was whether you had confirmed that apart from the positions you described, you've never held any other position within Democratic Cambodia.
Response. I think my response will be the same. I held the same position on the Education Committee, and when I was transferred to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I had been assigned to the new position in the protocol service section.
Monsieur le Président, je vois qu'il est 3
Mr. President, it's 20 to 3. I don't have much more questions to ask, and I want to know if you'll authorize me to go beyond the standard time for breaking to continue with my cross-examination.
The President Council, could you advise the Chamber how much time would you need to put questions to this witness?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, Mr. President.
The President, then you may proceed until you finish putting your questions.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Mr. Witness, the reason why I asked you to spell out the different posts you had held was to be absolutely sure that you have never held a position within a communication service within Democratic Kampuchea. Now, is it correct to say that you never worked in a communication service in Democratic Kampuchea?
The President, International Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't believe that this is a very clear question. What does the defense mean by a communication service? The witness tells us that he worked in propaganda and education for a few years, which certainly has a communications aspect to it. So perhaps, Mr. President, the question could be reworded so that we might gain a little bit more understanding about what it's meant to mean. The counsel for the defence, no problem, Mr. President. I shall certainly reword that. Mr. Witness, have you ever worked in a service responsible for sending telegrams?
Response. At that time, different sector would communicate with one another through telegrams, but it was not part of my duty. I had to only communicate with people concerned through letters. Letters would only be written when they were necessary, and the handwriting of my handwriting of the notes would then be typed, and I have no idea what they did with the typing, because it was part of people who had the expertise in dealing with the typing of the letters.
Mr. Witness, it is therefore true to say that you don't know how telegrams were either sent or received in Office 870.
The President, International Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed, and witness is instructed to hold on.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, we are going from a rather general question about telegrams. We're not sure if it was in the West Zone from the answer we got, I think it may have been the West Zone. Perhaps it concerns the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I don't really know. And now we have a question that refers to a telegram that we were talking about yesterday, which concerns the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and refers to Office 870. I think that between the two questions we might need several intermediary ones before we get to precise questions about Office 870, or at least to make it obvious to the witness what period we're talking about when we refer to sending telegrams from sector to sector. I'm a little bit lost among all of these questions to know exactly what and where we're talking about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je vais préciser la question.
I shall clarify my question. Mr. Witness, do you know how telegrams were sent when you were working in the West Zone?
Response. So far as I remember, the people who were authorized to deal with the telegrams were those at the zone level, not at the sector or district, let alone communes level. The short letters would be sent instead of the telegrams, and whatever the zone would deal with the telegrams, it was up to them.
I understand from that response that you don't know how telegrams were sent. Am I correct?
Response. Yes, it is correct to say so. My statement already reflects this response. The lower level people would write letters, and the letters would then be sent to upper level, and another upper level would handle them respectively.
Et le dernier point.
And just to be precise, one last point. Do you know how telegrams were sent when you're working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Response. The question you put to me concerns the geography and the geographic location and the practical work condition at the ministry. Normally, telegrams would only be sent to people in a long distance. If people had to communicate in the close proximity, for example, in the closer location, then they would not use telegrams.
And my last question, to be absolutely precise on this, among your duties within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, was there also the duty of sending telegrams?
Response. No, I had nothing to do with this.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you for those answers, Mr. Witness, and your patience as well. I have no further questions, Mr. President.
President, thank you, Counsel. Mrs. Saikolwati, you are now instructed to advise the Chamber concerning the reserve witness. The Chamber wishes to hear whether he or she is present. Saikolwati, Mr. President, witness TCW 583 is ready to be called, and witness has already confirmed that the witness has no relationship with any parties to the proceedings or to the accused persons, and oath has already been observed by the witness before the Iron Lord staff. The President, thank you, Mr. Saikolwati, and thank you, Mr. Witness, Mr. Nikon. Indeed, we appreciate your time. You have been responding to several questions put to you during the last 2 days, and your testimony sessions have already come to an end. The Chamber has no further questions to put to you. You are now dismissed. You may now feel free to be returned to your residence. And court officer is now instructed to assist the witness with his travel, and the Chamber wishes the witness the safe trip home. The Chamber would like to inform the public, rather the parties to the proceeding, that after the break, the Chamber is going to hear the testimonies of TCW 583. The floor will be handed over firstly to the prosecution before we proceed to other parties. The Chamber will adjourn for 20 minutes. The next session will be resumed by 3:10.
សូមក្រោកឈរ